good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a privilege to come and interact with our brightest and the best in the IITs, and I'm privileged to be here. I was intrigued by the broad theme of this series of talks, a sense of a changing world. So what is changing in our world? Which way are we headed? Are we headed for more peaceful times with development, etc., till the infinite degree, or are we headed for a period of greater war, instability and conflict? So one way is to go to an astrologer, the other way is to use empirical and scientific tools. So in this course of this talk, I'm going to put across to you a set of forecasts based upon what is called a heuristic warning forecast system, which was first enunciated by Professor Steve Chan of the Texas A&M University. He had written a paper called Warning Forecasts, Evaluation, Heuristics and Policy Context. I'm certain I don't have to explain what a heuristic is and what an algorithm is to such a educated audience. But what I would like to tell you is that strategic forecasts cannot be undertaken on the basis of single event prediction. I can't say for certain that tomorrow a rock will slide from the mountain there and fall into the Beas or the Satluj. We have to base them on pattern predictions. If you can get a pattern, you can forecast with the help of that pattern. Why? Because patterns tend to persist and repeat themselves cyclically. As they say, history may not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. Just like, mon rhymes with ton and it tends to reoccur. Similarly, history may not precisely repeat itself, but it tends to rhyme. And that happens because the patterns tend to persist for a long time. So it would be helpful to carry out a pattern modeling exercise to identify the patterns that emerge from the study of our recent history, and then we can use those patterns to forecast what is going to happen in the years ahead. Now the Steve Chan methodology is, I said, based on firstly identifying the patterns, and for this we have to carry out a very intensive study of our recent military history. Even the net assessment methodology uses something like this. We study intensively the last 30 to 40 years with a great amount of emphasis on the recent past. Then we have something called base frequency and prior probability of conflict. Now these are heuristics. Again, these are heuristics we rely upon to predict the future. How endemic is conflict in a particular region? Let us say the India-China region. How endemic? How often has it occurred? India-Pakistan region. No. It's far more endemic in the India-Pakistan border than it is on the India-China border. So if you want to talk of probability of conflict between China-India or India-Pakistan, you have much greater chances that it will occur in the India-Pakistan border because of the heuristic, the prior probability. And what were the precipitating factors in the past? Frequency of such actions by a given country. Pakistan will keep needling you. The Chinese don't needle. They come only when they mean business. Considerations of the status quo. Existing status quo serves as a base anchor for making warning forecasts. One of the easiest forecasts to make is tomorrow's weather will be like today's weather. So the status quo tends to persist. And then you put all this study against the backdrop of current trends. Now this past history must be juxtaposed with recent information and trends if you want to make valid inferences. So to make this heuristic warning forecast, it can't be precise, it can't be algorithmic. It can be, if I want to find out how many numbers are there in this telephone diary, one way is to scan each page and say it has 1,240,506. That is the algorithmic method. The other method is say, okay, page 1 has 110, page 2 has 115, page 3 has 117, so broadly per page it is so and so, multiplied by the total number of pages, broadly it has this. That's a heuristic. The human brain generally works in heuristics, it's not algorithmic. Now, so what about the patterns? Let's take a look at the last century. What was the patterns of conflict in the last century? The 20th century, ladies and gentlemen, was the most bloody period of human history. It was characterized, we had 2 world wars and we had a Cold War. The World War I, this lasted for 4 years, and we saw 8.4 million soldiers being killed. We thought it was the war to end all wars. But within a few decades down the line, we had the Second World War. Now this lasted for 6 years. We had 20.18 million civilian casualties and 27.72 million soldiers killed in this war. Overall, if you make a total, 48 million human beings killed. It's a horrific, carnage. It saw the extensive employment of air power, with which was used to rain destruction. The city of Tokyo was firebombed. Every single city in Japan was firebombed, and it ended with the use of atomic weapons. Then followed the Cold War. Now the world divided itself into 2 bipolar, 2 strong blocks. The bloc led by the Soviet Union socialist and the capitalist bloc led by the United States. And there was a kind of a balance. And because there were huge stockpiles of nuclear weapons, people were afraid to fight the Third World War. They were worried it would lead to the extinction of mankind. And therefore, most of did it lead to a period of peace? Did it lead to the peace dividend? No. There were a whole series of wars, but they were not in the main primal conflict areas of Europe. They were in the peripheral sectors of the Third World. And ladies and gentlemen, it would surprise you to learn that in about the 50 years of the Cold War, some 7.2 million people were killed. So it was not a peaceful period. So what were the patterns that preceded these 2 world wars? Let's take a look. If you want to predict, okay, will conflict take place again? So you'll have to see what were the patterns before the First and the Second World War. Both the world wars occurred in periods of multipolarity. Multipolarity means there are not just 1 or 2 major superpowers, but there are a whole series of strong power centers in the world, right? And they were competing for world dominance, right? And constantly competing for trade, for colonies, for captive markets, etc. Now these periods were aligned by rapid alignments and realignments. Start of World War II, Russia and Germany signed a pact, Molotov Pact, and suddenly they were at war. Italy started with the Axis powers. By the time it ended, it was with the Allies. So there were changes of alignment and realignment. There were cycles of globalization. Before World War I, before World War II, the world globalized. And suddenly it was followed by protectionism, rise of nationalism, increasing trade competition, trade wars that led to shooting wars, right? They were also preceded by large increases in the human population and periods of industrialization that led to urbanization. Now when you pack human beings into smaller and smaller spaces, you make them more dense, you increase the levels of aggression. Calhoun, the psychologist, has done studies on rats. When rats were packed into smaller and smaller areas, they turned more aggressive. They started attacking one another, attacking nests, rat rape, this thing, all that starts taking place. When you mass people, they're also more susceptible to manipulation by the mass media. In those days it was radio, in the World War I it was print media, then it was the radio medium, and now it is the television medium. You can influence people, whip them up into hatred against China, Pakistan, wherever, whatever you want. There was a rise of nationalism, Nazi Germany and National Socialists and fascists, they were rising all over in Europe. And the easiest way for them, nationalists, to unite a nation is to unite it against a hostile non-self. So nationalism led to militarization and outbreak of wars and conflict on a major scale. So what's happening today? We are seeing this pattern reoccur. The danger is you are seeing this pattern reoccur. We see a large number of these patterns re-emerging. Asia is now becoming what Europe was. It is industrializing, it is urbanizing. Today, out of the 9 nuclear powers in the world, 6 are in Asia. Okay. Out of the 4 largest economies of the world, 3 are in Asia: China, India, Japan, right? The demand for oil and gas and raw material and the competition for markets is on the rise. The world is entering a new phase of multipolarity. You have the USA, you have Russia, China, India, Japan and Europe. These are the new competing centers of power. What happened before World War I and World War II? There were multipolar world orders in place. Okay? That same multipolar world orders are coming, and the nations of Asia are militarizing very rapidly. Whether it is India, it is China, it is Japan, it is Korea, it is Vietnam, all these countries are militarizing, whether it is Pakistan, militarizing on a very major way. Nationalism is on the rise. It's on the rise in China, it's on the rise in Japan, it's on the rise in India, it's on the rise in Pakistan, and all over the globe, it's on the rise in Korea. So there is an alarming rise in the trend of using greater levels of military force. Now, this is what the multipolar world order would look like. There could be two basic formulations. If we regard China as the principal hegemon, the most destabilizing country in the world, then you could have an alliance of United States, India, Japan, Australia, Southeast Asian countries to balance the power of China, right? But if America is recognized or considered as the principal hegemon, then you could equally see Primakov had said there should be a triangular alliance of Russia, China, India to balance the power of America, okay? America and Europe put together. So, what now we've seen the pattern, and the patterns are dangerous.
Because the patterns are just what they were before World War I, before World War II.
In the Second World War, you know, they had huge reserves of chemical weapons, biological warfare weapons. They fought a war till the end, but they never used them. Today we had huge, after the Second World War, we had huge stockpiles of nuclear weapons. Are we going to have an era in which wars are fought to the bitter end like the Second World War, but nuclear weapons are not used? It could very well happen, right? And what do you see as the recent trend? China and Russia are the new challengers to the existing unipolar world order based on the United States. China is getting increasingly assertive and aggressive in a geopolitical backyard, especially South China Sea, East China Sea. She's trying to encircle India. She's making naval forays into the Indian Ocean. By the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, he's trying to outflank the Malacca Straits choke point and establishing bases in Gwadar and Djibouti. Now, Donald Trump, he has come up in the United States, and you see the rise of nationalism and protectionism in America. He's increasingly tried to assert itself, and they have been using higher and higher weapons of weapons of greater and greater lethality, especially in Syria and Afghanistan, and now an American carrier battle group right now is heading for North Korea. Vladimir Putin is on the rise in Russia, of course, and he is led to the rise of nationalism, and the Russians have used major military force in Ukraine and Syria. Major way, every single weapon that they had, they used. There is a rise of nationalism in India and Japan to balance the power of a rising China. And there are worrying trends towards increasing use of greater levels of lethality and military force. You know, China has a problem. All her energy and trade flows have to go through the Malacca Straits, the choke points of Malacca, Lombok, Sunda Straits. So she's trying to bypass this, and therefore she's trying to come into the Indian Ocean, and she's building the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor like this, so that her oil comes from Africa, Middle East and goes straight up to Xinjiang. And therefore she's also trying to counter the power of India in the Indian Ocean, right? Now, recent trends and emerging flashpoints. Just on the 6th of April this year, as President Xi Jinping was visiting the United States and having dinner with President Donald Trump, he ordered the attack on Syria. 60 cruise missiles were fired on the Shariat Civil Air Base in Syria and destroyed, flattened that particular air base. The message was not so much to Syria, it was to President Xi Jinping of China, that we can use weapons against you. 13th of April, the Americans dropped the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan. You know, each Tomahawk missile has 1,000 pounds of bombs. This particular bomb itself weighs 20,000 pounds. I mean, it's got 20,000 pounds of explosive. And it sort of sucks the oxygen out of the air. If you are there, your lungs will come out of your mouth. I mean, that is the kind of way it creates a kind of a vacuum effect. It's a very dangerous bomb, short of a nuclear bomb. It is the highest level of ordnance. So America is sending some signals. Look, we are prepared to use anything short of a nuclear bomb. And here it is. The Russians have used heavy weapons and military force in Ukraine and in Syria. You see, there is threat of escalation on the India-Pakistan border. You are aware that they beheaded 2 of our soldiers recently in the Krishna Ghati area, and the army chief has promised to hit back at a time and place of our own choosing. There are daily duels, fire duels taking place across the line of control. And let us say tomorrow, day after, we hit back in a major way and Pakistan escalates. And you could suddenly have a shooting war here in South Asia. Why go very far? There are also, Pakistan is having tensions with Iran and it is having tensions with Afghanistan. They recently claimed to have killed 50 Afghan soldiers in trans-border firing incidents. Iran, the chief of the Iran military, threatened Pakistan that unless you guys stop, aiding terrorists in our area, we will hit back at your terrorist bases in your territory. So there is, a violent kind of confrontational situation building up in South Asia also. What are the emerging hotspots of the world? There is North Korea, there is the South China Sea, there is the East China Sea, there is Syria, where of course the Russians and the Americans are both there in strength, and there is the India-Pakistan confrontation, there is Afghanistan. Sometimes some regions become very prone to conflict. And why? Basically, oil. The Middle East has oil. So it will always be a bone of contention. There will always be some war or the other on. The Americans were initially buying a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. Now they have stopped buying any oil from Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states. They are buying it only from their own hemisphere. So now they are free to destabilize the Middle East because all India's oil, China's oil, Japan's oil, Korea's oil comes from the Middle East. So if they just finger the Middle East, they have put you in trouble. They put China in trouble. South China Sea has oil, undersea oil. And therefore the Chinese are trying to corner this particular area. Central Asia has oil. These could be wars for oil. Tomorrow in this century, you could also have wars for water. 10 of Asia's major rivers, 9 originate in Tibet, right? And Tibet, Chinese very smartly captured in 1950. What if they now divert the Brahmaputra and take it towards China, North China or South China or wherever? North China, they are more likely to take it towards. It could lead to war. The Indus, the Satluj, the ones that flow through you, also come through Tibet to us. So in an era of water shortage, even this could lead to war. There is a saying, the Chinese saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So ladies and gentlemen, I am a soldier, I am a realist. I would like to hope that the world would be a peaceful place, but it is better to be prepared for what is coming.